Hey kids, it's me. I'm running a little late on these videos. I was going to try and do them once a week, but yes, last week was a busy week, and I just got back from a trip to St. John, got to visit the kids and take some gear up to the studio space that I'm sharing. So that was really nice. I'm excited about moving back up there and getting some stuff done. So, um, I'm going to dive into the fourth of four long boxes of comics here that I've been digging through. And then in future weeks, we'll look at the shelves before I start packing them up, hopefully. And I've got a couple of short boxes and other stuff to dig through as well. So we'll start. We're in the S's here in the long boxes, and it starts with a single old issue of Strange Adventures. Got an ape cover, so that's how you know it's probably from the 60s. Oh, 72. Okay. Um, yeah, 20 cents, early 70s. Um, by Murphy Anderson, Carmine Infantino. Infantino? Infantino. I don't know. And story by Gardner Fox, which I think was often the case with Adam Strange and Strange Adventures. Backup feature of a gorilla, of course. Anyway, pretty typical Strange Adventures issue, I would say. Now, more recently, of course, that title has been revived by Tom King and Mitch Gerads and Evan Shaner, um, with Gerads and Shaner basically depicting different. I think Shaner is depicting the Ran part of the book, and Jared's is doing the kind of grittier Earth-based part of the book. Adam Strange, of course, is a character who goes back and forth between Earth and the planet Ran, where he is kind of this science hero. So it's kind of a story of a regular guy, more or less a Flash Gordon kind of guy, who is uh, pulled against his will, I think, for the most part, by a thing called the Zeta Beam back and forth between Earth and Ran. Anyway, so he's been kind of a peripheral DC Comics figure for a while, and as they like to do, they asked, or maybe he asked them, Tom King to write a new series, much like he had done with Mr. Miracle and the Human Target. So this one, also called Strange Adventures, is that sort of modern update of the Adam Strange character. Good series. Um, I'll stick that. I'll actually put that up on the shelf with the other Tom King stuff. Here's a reprint of an old issue of Mystery in Space that I tossed in there as well, which I expect they must have released as a bit of a explainer for that Tom King series. And then I've got one last Adam Strange related comic here called DC Superstars of Space number 6. And he's fighting something up on Ran, a robot ghost, sure. Um, this title, it's basically all their Flash Gordon type characters in one place. There's someone called Captain Comet, don't remember him. Someone called Tommy Tomorrow, I do remember that character. Um, by Ernie Chua, apparently. And someone called Space Cabbie. Is that actually a Okay, Captain Comet was written by John Broome, art by Murphy Anderson and Joe Giella. That's all right. Anyway, so after Strange Adventures, I've got a couple of issues of a Charlton title called Strange Suspense Stories. And as you might expect, I'm guessing I'm going to find some kind of Steve Ditko horror comic in here. Oh, here's one by Pat Boyette. That's cool. No problem with him. Anyway, so yes, issues 4 and 9 of Strange Suspense Stories. There's some racism, yeah. Oh, now who drew this? Himes. F. Himes. Or Jimenez, maybe. It's kind of a very 60s illustration style there. I'm intrigued by that style. I'll dig into that a little more later. So next up, we've got this was a I see. It's one of those Image First reprints of Street Angel, one of Jim Rugg's many iterations of Street Angel. Fun book. Rugg is always doing interesting looking stuff. And after Street Angel, we've got an issue of Supergirl. I'm guessing also from the 70s, given the cover there. Teaming up with Zatanna. Actually, it looks like they're fighting over some kind of Yeti. Sure thing, DC. And after Supergirl, we've got a bunch of Superman. So let's see here. I'll just plow through these. We've got Superman number 278, one of the big dollar comics. Actually, it wasn't even $1.60 for 100 pages. A lot of reprints, probably. That's how they rolled back then. Number 287 was a regular sized comic at 25 cents. And it features. I guess it's a return of Crypto. Crypto had been away for a while, probably after they did a bit of post Silver Age cleanup. Written by Elliot S. Magan, art by Kurt Swan and Bob Oxner. Another issue of Superman 294. He's the last man on Earth. That's rough. Number 338. Something to do with enlarging Kandor. Supergirl's trying to stop him. Kandor is the bottled city that's like this big. Oh, here's a Gil Kane cover on Superman 390. We're getting into the 80s here. Some sun damage there. And more Gil Kane on the cover. This is annual number 9 from 1983. Oh, wow. Written by Elliot Magan. Pencils by Alex Toth. And inks by Terry Austin. And right now you're saying, hey, asshole, turn the comic around so we can see the Alex Toth art. Well, I was just looking for a nice page. How's that? Here's a fun one. The Adventures of Superman in Kandor, number 547, also starring the Atom. Oh, and it's illustrated by our pal Stuart Immonen and Jose Marzan Jr., written by Carl Kiesel. It's the Superman Blue issue where Superman visits Halifax here. He visits Strange Adventures. I believe that had something to do with a contest that local creator and former Strange Adventures employee Sean Jordan had entered. If this is the one I'm thinking of. Oh no, here we are. Yeah, yeah. There's a scene with Sean talking to Superman, and the Citadel there in the background. That's fun. All right, so next up we've got Superman #1 from the Convergence event, which I certainly would have picked up because the artist was Lee Weeks. Is Lee Weeks. Oh, now we're going back a ways. Here's some old ones. Superman #137, 10 cents on the cover. Oh, it's an untold story, huh? Okay, so it's kind of an Elseworlds thing where Superman gets raised by a gangster or something instead of the Kents, and they use him to break into vaults. Okay, anyway. Here's number 285. Oh, nice cover by Nick Cardy. Superman getting tortured by plants. Interior art by Kurt Swan. Here's a promotional comic for Radio Shack and their line of computers, the TRS-80. So here's Superman defeating some kind of terrible plot with the help of the TRS-80 computer whiz kids. The original guys in the chair, I guess. Art by Jim Starlin and Dick Giordano. Wow. Well, Starlin collectors. Who knows how this fits into his whole cosmic tapestry. Anyway, promotional comics, always good for a laugh. So that's it for Superman. Now we've got a couple issues of Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen, one of which is one of the old pre-Kirby ones, number 75. And then one that is relatively recent, post-Crisis, and post kind of Superman reboot by Byrne. So yeah, actually that's what this is. This is the post-Crisis reboot by John Byrne, that series. It's issue number 37, where they're basically recreating one of the old Kirby covers. And Olsen is back in one of the big new Genesis vehicles. As you can see on the cover, it also guest stars a couple more of that era's characters, the Newsboy Legion and the Guardian, who later got a series in the Grant Morrison's Seven Soldiers of Victory miniseries. So that's it for all the Supermans. Next up, we've got just one issue of something Marvel published called Supernatural Thrillers, featuring the Valley of the Worm. And as you can see there, that's another Gil Kane cover, which is exactly why I would have picked it up. Who's on the inside? Gil Kane again. Excellent. Ernie Chua inking. Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway writing. Cool. Adapted from something by Robert E. Howard, apparently. I'm sure Marvel was adapting all the Robert E. Howard that they could back then. Here's a fun one, also featuring art by Gil Kane, written by Alan Moore, who, as you may recall, had a a run on Supreme. It was being published by an imprint called Awesome. I honestly don't remember that that imprint. If it was like some division of Image, maybe, or just their own company. Yeah. So anyway, um, Alan Moore wrote it, penciled by Chris Sprouse, inked by Al Gordon, and they brought Gil Kane in to illustrate flashbacks. Kane himself is a character in this issue as an Imagineer of stories. Um, anyway, fun way to pay tribute to a great artist, Gil Kane. I don't know if this was before or after Kane passed away. I'm guessing before, since he was able to contribute to it. Um, but yeah, cool stuff. Oh, here's some Swamp Thing. There's a reprint of the original issue. The the origin issue, I should say, by Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson. Classic stuff. And after that, not quite so classic, the 1982 film adaptation of the first film starring Adrienne Barbeau. That was a Wes Craven movie. Wow. Script by Bruce Jones. That's not bad. And it was illustrated by Mark Texeira, Antoni de Zuniga, lettered by Gaspar Saladino, colored by Tatiana Wood. Hey, that's a pretty solid crew of people on this book, actually. More solid than you would tend to get. But Swamp Thing is a beloved character. I'm sure they wanted to at least have a Swamp Thing comic that would meet people's Swamp Thing comic expectations, even if perhaps the movie quite could not quite do so. But Swamp Thing had pretty big things ahead of him a bit later on in the decade, of course, and another movie. So anyway, I'm back and the sun is getting brighter. Um, let's see now. I've got a couple, yet more Gil Kane. Um, Not that I'm going to complain about that. I've got a couple issues of a mini series he did in the 80s for DC called Sword of the Atom. Miniseries were all the rage at the time, and this was certainly one of the better ones. It was written by Jan Strnad. I've never been able to pronounce that guy's name. Um, and it was something that I think Kane is co-creating the concept of this book as well. Now this is weird. There's an advertisement in the center spread of the second issue, and it's like a slick 4-page ad for like gold rings and jewelry. I'm not sure that this was a wise ad spend for Mark Jewelers, but whatever. Anyway, this is Gil Kane really, really had an excellent 80s between this book and his adaptation of the Ring of the Nibelung cycle, the Wagner Ring cycle. That's an amazing miniseries. I don't know if it's in print. It would be wonderful to see some kind of absolute edition of that, DC, if you're listening. Not that you're listening. Uh, but if anybody out there has DC's ear, I will be first in line to buy an absolute ring cycle by Gil Kane or artist edition or whatever it is you want to do. As the kids say 20 years ago, hook that right into my veins. So I think that's the last we see of Gil Kane for a little bit. No, it isn't. There's more Gilkane next. But first, it's Tales to Astonish number 96, The Submariner and the Hulk, neither of whom had their own books at the time, I'm guessing. What year is this? 67. Oh, no. I guess they certainly had their separate books by then, I guess. Um, so we've got a Bill Everett story in here for the Submariner, which is cool. And for the Hulk, oh, interesting. It's a Stan Lee and Marie Severin illustrated story. The wonderful, wonderful Marie Severin, sister, of course, of John Severin, also a great artist for Marvel, EC, and many others. People probably primarily know him as the guy who basically drew 90% of Cracked magazine, I think. Um, but he had such an amazing career, and of course I'm isn't this always the way you start talking about Marie Severin and you wind up talking about John. Poor Marie. Uh, she didn't have the career John did, obviously, because of sexism. That's entirely the reason. She was every bit as talented, but didn't get the kind of breaks that a man would get back then. Um, and that's a shame. She's a hell of an artist, and you can see her all over the Marvel comics in the 60s and 70s. I'm not quite sure if she stuck with them very far beyond that. So the Kane comic that I mentioned is this special, something called Talos of the Wilderness Sea. Um, Pretty typical Kane cover there. Written by Kane and Sternad again, illustrated by Kane, letters by Gaspar, colors by Greg Theakston. Wow. And the editor was Julius Schwartz, the late Julius Schwartz, who was another friend of a friend back in the 90s. He uh, kindly appeared on a video message to me and said some encouraging words and signed a couple things to me. It was very nice. Weird guy. Okay, so we're out of the S's and we're into the T's. I have one issue of Team America, not to be confused with the puppet movie by Trey and Matt. This was a toy line, I believe, of a team of like dirt bike and motorcycle riders who would, compete by day and solve crimes by night, kind of thing. Kind of like in a weird way, kind of like an early Fast and Furious idea. And everybody, it was a team, kind of Megaforce like it was a multicultural team, everybody representing their country and all that stuff. Anyway, um, I could not tell you a single thing about this comic except that it was another of many toy related comics that Marvel was doing back then. Some of them were great, and some of them were not so great. I remember there was a storyline. They actually tied this into the X-Men at one point by having them meet with Charles Xavier to see if um, they had this ability where if they rode together in a certain way, it would summon a mystery, like the Black Rider or some mystery rider would appear. Um, and so they met with Charles. Oh, speaking of Megaforce. Anyway, a lot of that nonsense was happening in the early 80s. Uh, Everyone wanted to have the next, G.I. Joe, basically. So, Another single issue of something called Teenage Hot Rodders from Delacorte in the 60s. Uh, Jack Keller credit on the cover. Don't know that name. Jack Keller credit on the inside. Not a name I'm familiar with. Um, Seems to be okay at drawing the vehicles, which of course would be pretty important. Pretty standard kind of character illustration on the inside for the time. It's got kind of a I've been swiped from Ditko look about it. Anyway, Teenage Hot Rodders. And more teens, the Teen Titans this time. This is one of the original run, also from the 60s, I'm guessing. The Demon of Dog Island, oh my goodness. Oh, 71 actually, this one. 15-cent cover title. Who drew this? Don't see any credits, of course. Oh, there we go. Demon of Dog Island. Art's pretty decent. Kind of typical 70s kind of gothic stuff of the time. Kind of got a romance art vibe to it, actually. See, it wasn't just the 80s Teen Titans that were kind of the sex appeal title. This is a goofy comic book. Okay, someone's possessed by a demon on the moors, basically. I'm just looking for credits. I'm sorry, this is boring. Things are really... Wow, here's an ad for a movie. I think I remember this, called Zeppelin with Michael York. And wow, no credits at all. Guys, Jesus fucking Christ. Anyway, onto the Titans title that you probably remember more, the classic Marv Wolfman, George Perez. Looks like I've got one issue of it, plus the Cyborg special. I used to have the whole run, or at least up to some of the first few dozen issues many years back. So next up, we're working through the teas, and we got a couple issues here of a mini-series from Dark Horse, I think from the 90s, called The Territory, by the team of Jamie Delano and David Lloyd, who you may recall from the 2 issues I showed a couple videos ago of Hellblazer that they collaborated on. David Lloyd, of course, also the artist of V for Vendetta, great book. And a sweet guy. I met him at a convention in Toronto about 30 years ago. The first one where I was exhibiting. And he had the table right across from me. It was not a super busy convention. I think there were some promotional issues, so we were kind of twiddling our thumbs a lot of the time. And so it was nice to chat with him. At that same show, incidentally, David Mazzucchelli. He was also pretty close to being across from me. So coming up next, we've got a mini-series that was pretty fun by the American writer Walter Mosley. He did a mini-series about Marvel's The Thing, illustrated by Tom Riley and Jordi Belair. That was fun. I don't know if Mosley has done much in the way of comics. Okay. Now here is an issue Okay. So this is John Stanley. You may recall, or I don't know if it was in the last video, I think I had a random issue of a comic called Val. And apparently that was illustrated by John Stanley, who is a celebrated Canadian cartoonist. If we zoom in, you see some kind of, I guess, hockey sticker for someone named Arnie Brown. All right, just random stuff. Here's a couple random issues of Thor, number 272 and number 282. So 272, nice. Roy Thomas, John Buscema, and Tom Palmer reunited for a story there called The Day the Thunder Failed, where Thor is no longer worthy of the thunder, or of the hammer. And then Rites of Passage, written by Mark Grunwald and Ralph Macchio. Artists were Keith Pollard and Pablo Marcos. Oh, and this is issue number 200, apparently? No, 282. Stanley presents the 200th Journey into Mystery. Oh, okay. Yeah, okay. So this is the 200th issue of Thor, as Thor, but it started as Journey into Mystery, uh, and he first appeared in issue 82 or something like 82, 83, something like that. So this is, and then they just converted the title into just Thor, but it's always been Journey into Mystery. It will drive you a little crazy sometimes if you try to sort out, this title used to be Journey into Mystery, now it's Thor, and anyway. Publishers, because they were sending stuff through the mail, and there were, they had certain tax obligations and interstate trade obligations and so on and so forth. Part of the whole mechanism of publishing comics used to including a circulation statement once a year, I think, in your comic book, and you would see it every once in a while for whatever title it was, and it would be like a statement of circulation, uh, National Periodical Publications is the publisher of, the Karate Kid or whatever, and it has, I don't know, I don't remember if it got into how many copies they were circulating, or just basically stating, we're circulating this in the United States per these laws and so on and so forth. It was just this bit of legalese that they would have to put in their comics every year or so. I don't know if they had to do it for all comics or if it was just a random thing, or I don't know. Anyway, so they basically had to try and keep, I think, fairly accurate track in their bookkeeping of, what title was what and when it became another title. And I'm sure it was probably just some weird shell game. But anyway, certainly no strangers to weird shell games in the comics business. Um, and of course, Loki is no stranger to shell games either. Here is a fun mini series from a little while ago called Thor and Loki Double Trouble by, I think it's Jillian Tamaki? Mariko Tamaki, sorry. And art by Gurihiru. Um, yeah, just a fun all ages book of the the two brothers having a romp through the universe. Next up, a couple of issues of Time Warp, DC's science fiction anthology from the 70s, mostly the 70s. Oh no, actually, this is 1980. Oh, look at that. Um, so yeah, these are dollar comics. They were, you know, more pages than the standard size at the time, and typically would include a lot of reprints. Um, but that wasn't such a bad deal back then. It was often the only way to see some classic comics. Like here's some Steve Ditko in this one. So much like their horror comics, it was probably to a certain extent also competing with books like Heavy Metal. Here's some more Gil Kane. So yeah, basically, I'm sure the marching orders were, you know, if you've got short science fiction comics, you don't have to sell them to Heavy Metal or to Epic. You can sell them to Time Warp. Yeah, here's one with that Gil Kane story I just showed you was written by J.M. DeMatteis. Relatively early work for him. Also a guest at that show in Toronto, I believe. Um, this issue. Here's one by Denny O'Neil and Dick Giordano. Classic stuff. I wonder if they've ever collected this. Oh, here's some more Ditko. I think people would be interested in a collection of Time Warp if there isn't one. Next up, we've got a mini series of Torpedo. This is Italian, I believe. I think this is Hard Boiled Comics. Oh, okay, so this is a Fantagraphics um, imprint, I guess. Hard Boiled Comics. Um, and this must be from the 90s, I'm guessing. Yeah, 93. So yeah, at the time, Fantagraphics was um, kind of diversifying their lineup between Eros Comics, which was, as you might expect, erotic and just straight up porn comics, and then their regular comics catalog, including Eight Ball, Love and Rockets, all that stuff. And Torpedo, as you can see, even with the artist's signature, very Alex Toth influenced kind of gangster crime comics. Okay, now we've got a Marvel Monster comic, Tower of Shadows. Number what? Number 7. September 1970. I was trapped by Titano, the monster that time forgot. Well, if you're trapped by a monster that time forgot, you are probably pretty screwed. Apparently, Titano is some kind of giant crab. This is their this is their submarine that they landed on his. There's a whale for comparison. So that would be a that would be a fearfully large crab. Crab. Here's a story called The Scream of Things, uh, written by Alan Brodsky. Alan Brodsky. Hmm. Art by Barry Smith, ink by Vince Coletta. Oh. What a bummer. There's Barry Windsor Smith, inked by Coletta. Lucky us. Alan Brodsky. I must look that name up. Brodsky, of course, is a famous name in comics. Saul Brodsky was in the Marvel bullpen for years. Um, his son, whose name I forget, might have just been uh, Saul Jr. or something, had a publishing company, an indie company in the 80s for a while called Soulson, Soul's Son, get it? And they were kind of infamous at the time for not paying people, shall we say, and just like bad conditions. Pretty typical. I mean, pretty typical of the comics business at any time, but the 80s with the black and white boom was a particularly bad time for it. So it put some hard feelings on the Brodsky name, I'm afraid. But anyway, continuing through the teas, actually last one of the teas, The Two Gun Kid, number 74. I'm guessing that's from the 60s. Stan Lee, Dick Ayers, Coletta again. Not too bad here. Coletta's probably better suited to westerns, honestly. Like this is pretty decent. It helps when you've got Dick Ayers to ink over. But anyway, pretty typical two-gun kid, I would imagine. Now we're into the U's, which means you've got to be prepared for the unexpected. Womp womp. I've got more issues of this than I realized. This box is actually probably not going to take all that long to go through because I've got a lot of long runs of some books. Okay, so apparently I have this many issues of Unexpected, which I did not realize, including the last issue, which was published, I believe, in the 80s. Issue number 222, 1982. Look at that. Written by Arnold Drake. Artist Tor P. Infante. That sounds like a pseudonym, but whatever. So Unexpected was a horror title, one of the many DC horror titles that ran through the 60s and 70s. The earliest issue I have here is number 120, and that must be in the 70s. Yep, 1970. And it was just an anthology. I think whoever had horror stories going could be assigned or submit them. There was a memorable treasury-sized version as well that reprinted some of the favorite stories. This is one that literally did scare me as a child. I'm ashamed to admit. It's a Easter-themed one with a pretty evil-looking bunny, I think you'll agree, taking chomps out of kids in this issue from the late 70s. No, September 1980. So I was 12. Young enough to be creeped out by that creepy bunny. And yeah, it looks like a lot of later ones. They were kind of abandoning the usual horror format as they did in favor of just weird tales, I guess. Yeah, I seem to have a lot of the last year or two of the run. Not the best era of it, I would imagine. Still in the U's, got an issue of The Unknown Soldier, which I'm guessing that's from the 80s. Nope, 76. David Michelny. Jerry Talauk is the artist. It's kind of a familiar style. Kind of journeyman guy that you'd see in war comics a lot back then. And I've also got this mini-series from Vertigo, late 90s, by Garth Ennis, as they are wont to do. They love to do that kind of revival over at Vertigo. And a few issues of a Delacorte title called Unusual Tales. It's kind of spooky, Twilight Zone-y kind of comics, I'm guessing. Looks like the earliest one I have is this one here, Out of the Tomb. Oh. I don't recognize the artist Laskia. It does have a bit of a Ditko-y vibe, not surprisingly. Here's oh, it's not the first issue, it's the 8th issue of US 1, the Marvel classic about the adventures of a trucker. Written by Al Milgrom, art by Frank Springer, inked by Mike Esposito, lettering by Janice Chang. Okay, now we're into V's. And the first I have is an image series by Ed Brubaker and Steve Epting called Velvet. And it's actually a couple series. There's a first mini-series and then a second one called The Secret Lives of Dead Men. And then another one called The Man Who Stole the World. And the premise of Velvet, basically, is just James Bond gender flipped. Other than, and also, I guess, somewhat age flipped, but not really, you know. I think James Bond in most of the incarnations we see is getting on in years a little bit, late 30s, early 40s, certainly a bit too old for that kind of a job. And I think that's basically, if I recall, that's basically what's happening here, taking Miss Moneypenny and making her a James Bond. Good book. Kind of surprised well, no, I'm not surprised. We haven't seen some kind of movie or something of it yet. But if there was one, I bet it would be great. Next up, we've got one of my favorite series, really, and it kept me on tenterhooks every issue as it came out at the time. V for Vendetta by Alan Moore and David Lloyd. It was originally published in an anthology magazine in the UK called Warrior, but they were not able to complete it, and Alan Moore got busy doing Swamp Thing and a bunch of other stuff for DC. And when they were asking, hey, you got anything else? And he said, well, I've got this V for Vendetta thing, but it's not finished. And they were like, well, finish it. We'll hire David Lloyd. We'll finish it and we'll publish it and eventually they collected it, of course. And next to Watchmen, it's probably the DC book that people love the most from Alan Moore, I would think. Swamp Thing too. Moore has a lot of great works to choose from. and it's certainly one of the top ones for David Lloyd, I think. Um, just spectacular art. It's something that, because of the iconography of the the Guy Fawkes mask. Amusingly, tomorrow is Guy Fawkes Day as I record this. Um, because of the iconography of that, and then the movie they made, which was, not the greatest movie, but it got the point across, I think. Um, I feel like we have kind of just absorbed V for Vendetta as part of our culture a bit more than we have most comics of that time. Um, anyway, very, very highly recommend that book if you have somehow managed to not read it yet. And next up, here's one of those long runs I was talking about, and it's one that, until recently, people probably wouldn't have thought much about. Um, it's Vigilante by Marv Wolfman and Keith Pollard, and that lineup changes as time goes on. But so if you've watched the Peacemaker TV series, then you know that Vigilante is, in that show, this weird little dude who is a vigilante and goes around, uh, much like Peacemaker, is a bit over the top with the violence, punishing criminals and so on. In the comics, it was a much more serious character. He was basically a lawyer, I think, who was disgusted with the lack of justice in the system and how broken the system was. So he decides to put on a costume and uh, actually, you know what he was? He's their Punisher. He's DC's Punisher, is exactly what he is. Um, and much like the Punisher, they would use the title as a way for him to intersect with other DC characters. Batman, obviously, would be one of them, and to reflect off those characters and say, well, here's why they're good, and he's got a different path. It's a darker path, and so he's Wolverine. He's the Punisher. He's the one of the dark, grim, and gritty characters. The most notable, well, it's probably not for me to say most notable, but certainly one of the more memorable moments in Vigilante was, again, Alan Moore, who stepped in to write a couple of issues. And then the other most notable uh, thing about the Vigilante comic is that it ends with Adrian Chase, the main character, straight up killing himself because he has not successfully, he has not dealt with the original problem, which was his lack of faith in the justice system, his disillusionment, mental illness, um, and his experiences as a vigilante have, only made things worse, apparently. So that's how they end the book. Um, I also have an annual, two annuals, I guess, um, and then a DC Comics Presents team up issue where it's Superman and the Vigilante, which would be a pretty weird team up if you ask me, but penciled by Kurt Swan. Well, okay. Here's a single issue of Tom King's Vision. I guess it's maybe the first issue, or maybe a reprint of the first issue. Anyway, great series. It's the one that introduced me and probably a lot of us to Tom King's writing. And of course, this was borrowed from somewhat for the Marvel WandaVision series. and maybe they'll also be using some of it for the upcoming Vision Quest. I don't know if that's a series or a movie or whatever it is, but anyway. More Gil Kane. Some pretty classic stuff. The Power of Warlock, issues 2 and 6. Where Warlock is fighting with the High Evolutionary and Counter Earth and all that fun stuff. And here's another long run of a pretty great comic from DC called Wasteland. There were, I believe, 19 issues, something like that. 18 issues. But there was also a weird numbering error early on. Yes. Where yeah, they published an issue number 6, cover dated May 88. And then they published something called The Real Number 6, also cover dated May 88. And now let me see. Before that, issues 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, so I don't know what happened there, but there are 2 number 6s for some reason, one of which has no cover illustration. It was a weird book in many ways. That's actually one of the least weird things about this book. It was a collaboration between improv legend Del Close, who is one of the legendary improv teachers from, I believe, the Second City Company in Chicago. So many of the stories in here are basically Del Close stories. If you're a big Del Close head, look for you probably know this already, but try and find a run of Wasteland somewhere. I don't think it's ever been collected. I have heard rumblings about collections here and there, but as far as I know, hasn't happened yet. The other co-writer for I believe for the whole run, was Joan Ostrander, who I think is one of the developers of the Peacemaker, from like the post-crisis Peacemaker. And then there was kind of a rotating cast of artists that included George Freeman, David Lloyd, again, William Messner Loebs, you may recall from the 80s. Oh gosh, he had a great great indie series called Journey, I believe. And Don Simpson, creator of Megaton Man. And then I think they had a few other, Timothy Truman was a guest artist, Ty Templeton was a guest artist, Bill Ray was a guest artist. Actually, Bill Ray became a regular artist later on in the run. So yeah, well worth seeking out if you can find Wasteland, one of the great uncollected books of the 80s. Continuing along in the W's, another great book, but this one is collected, and it's not exactly a book, Wednesday Comics. This is one of my all-time favorite comics, period. Certainly one of my all-time favorites from DC. And it was a 12-issue series done on tabloid-sized paper, basically like in the 40s. And what they did was they commissioned a bunch of creative teams to do, I think, mostly single-page installments of different heroes. So here's Neil Gaiman and Mike Allred on Metamorpho, Berganza and Galloway on Teen Titans, Paul Pope on Strange Adventures, Palmiotti and Connor on Supergirl, uh, Didio, Garcia Lopez, and Kevin Nolan on Metal Men. That's pretty cool. Anyway, I'm just gonna stop jabbering and just show you some incredible art. This, to me, is what comics ought to be. Period. And this actually, coincidentally, or not so coincidentally, is the kind of format that I'm trying to publish next. Without the massive production costs involved, ideally. Anyway, as I said, this is available, or was. I think they're actually doing a new printing of it soon. But it was available in like a giant, basically artist edition size, full size hardcover, and I don't remember if there was a soft cover or not. I only have this version, but I would like to get a nice collection as well, because folding and unfolding these is not ideal. Anyway, Wednesday Comics. Can't recommend it highly enough. And now we got a bunch of random W stuff. Weird Romance #1 from Eclipse Comics. Guessing that's probably some reprints. Yeah, looks like it. Weird Mystery #8 from DC. Weird Mystery #11 from DC. Weird Mystery #12 from DC. Looks like I've got some Weird Mystery from DC. I didn't realize I had quite so many of these. Okay, so now we're into Weird War, which I definitely do make an effort to collect just because it is such a bizarre title. Looks like the earliest one I have is number 96. Oh no, that's not true. They're just out of order. I've got number 15 is the earliest. And looks like the latest is 123. And then I also have an issue of Marvel's title, Weird Wonder Tales, number 16. Something to do with a shark. Oh, I see. It's a reprint from something called Men's Adventure, number 25. Oh, and here's a reprint from Venus, one of the old classic Marvel titles from the 50s, I want to say. Possibly 40s. Anyway. So yeah, Weird Comics. And then we've got a much more, well, it's still very retro, but it's a much more modern comic. Welcome to the Maynard by James Robinson and the great Canadian artist Jay Bone. I think he's Canadian. Cover on this one by Chris Samney, which is nice. Looks like they've got different covers all along here. Fun book. Got one issue here of We're Taking Everyone Down With Us. I think this is a relatively new comic. Yeah, Matthew Rosenberg. I expect I got it pulled for the Tula Lotay cover there. Okay. Still in the W's. We've got the first issue of Werewolf by Night. Now in his own magazine. Thank goodness. Western Gunfighters, number 28. Anthology book for Kid Colt, the Gunslinger, and the Apache Kid. Looks like a Gil Kane cover. Pretty classic 70s stuff there. And Western Gunfighters. Let's see now, this is number 6. Oh, so this is actually an earlier issue. With the original Ghost Rider, who was a white-clad Western hero. A few issues of What If. Number 14, what if Sergeant Fury had fought World War II in outer space? What indeed? What if the Hulk always had Bruce Banner's brain? Well, that, of course, was a what if that became true. Roy Thomas and Herb Trimp. This one's from 77. So yeah, it wasn't until about, 10 years later that we started to see all the actual Smart Hulk stuff with Peter David. And then number 31, what if the Wolverine had killed the Hulk on their first encounter? And what if the Fantastic Four had never been? I have another issue of What If, but I keep it with the Kirby stuff because it's the one about what if the Marvel bullpen had become the Fantastic Four. Funny book. Here's an issue of What's the Furthest Place from Here? First issue, I guess. It's by Tyler Boss and Matthew Rosenberg. Should really catch up on that. Got a few issues here of The Wicked and the Divine. I've kind of traded in the trades on this, but I kept a few single issues, probably because of who the interior art was. They had guests from guest art by the likes of Tula Lotay and Kevin Wada. I kept this fun cover of the two creators. Anyway. And you may recall my discussion of John Allison way back with Giant Days and all that stuff. This is another one of his series called Wicked Things. It's a 6-issue series. I think there's been some more online since then. Something else I have to catch up on. But it's an update of his mystery solving teens titles. Here's a single issue of Witch Blood. It's in honor of Jose Luis Garcia Lopez. Just kind of in his style there on the cover. Fun. It's from Vault. And then I've got a couple issues of It's Midnight, The Witching Hour. Just another DC 70s horror title. This one hosted by the Weird Sisters. These two issues are from the 70s. Numbers 62 and 78. Here is a book I need to buy the rest of. I'm not quite sure. I got my wires crossed and only wound up with the first issue of this Wonder Girl series by Joelle Jones, right? So yeah, really dig Joelle Jones's work, and yeah, I want to read the rest of that for sure. I might go looking for it today, in fact. Some more Wonder Woman stuff here. Let's see. Issue number 212 of the original run of Wonder Woman, where we're having a bit of a soap opera moment there. They're trying to get her to come back to the Justice League. Not quite sure why she left. And here's a Wonder Woman annual, first post-crisis annual, I'm guessing, with a whole bunch of artists involved, including George Perez, Art Adams, Ross Andrew, Brian Bolland, John Bolton, Garcia Lopez, and Kurt Swan. Damn. That's a lot of talent in one regular sized annual. Okay. Approaching the end of the W's, we've got an old issue of World's Finest from 1970. No cover. And reprints. Reprints of Silver Age. And possibly Golden Age. Superman and Batman stuff. Here's a more modern World's Finest from the 80s, number 237. Where there's giant locusts attacking either Metropolis or Gotham, and Superman is telling the cops to stay away from the locusts. In true Silver Age, what the hell style. That was really the Super Age Julie Schwartz strategy for getting people to buy your comics in DC in the 50s was Superman is doing something demonstrably insane. I've got to pick this up and find out how it turns out. What happened here? And looks like the last issue of World's Finest I have is this one from 81, number 267, with the Challengers of the Unknown. And Rich Buckler and Giordano on the cover. Last few in the W's are a few issues of Worlds Unknown, science fiction comic from Marvel. Most notable for their adaptation of Killdozer. But there's also a A.E. Van Vo story here with nice Gil Kane. I think that's Kane on the cover. Dan Adkins inside. I wouldn't mind some kind of collection of that book as well, Marvel, if you're listening. I know you are. Here is a single issue of an anthology called Xeno with Chris Condon, Nick Cagnetti, Melissa Flores, Shaky Kane, Jordan Thomas, Phil Hester, Daniel Irizarry. Pretty cool stuff. Relatively recent, I think. $2023. Might have a look for the rest of that as well. Oh, nice ad in the back for Dwellings by Jay Stevens. I was just watching a video just like this, actually, of the great artist Terry Moore, who was also at that convention in Toronto. Isn't that funny? Anyway, he was just going through a box of his most beloved comics in his studio, and the very first thing he pulled up was an issue of Dwellings. Because Jay Stevens is a cartoonist. All right, we're into the X's, and that, of course, means the X-Men. Number 21. It's the earliest one I have. It's in rough shape. It's missing its first page. Art was not... Oh, no, I guess... I don't think this is Kirby art on this issue. Well, no, maybe it is. It's wonky. X-Men was a wonky title for a long time. Here's number 60, number 69. Looks like some kind of annual from 1970. Number 84, 1973. You're definitely into the kind of dullest days of the X-Men at this point, or before they got canceled, and famously came back as the new X-Men that we all know and love. And here's a few one-shots. There's a relatively recent one by Roger Stern, Dave Cockrum. With some, I don't know if this was an old like inventory story that they decided to publish. I know they've done that a couple times. But anyway, it's a chance to see some more, yeah, two never before seen stories illustrated by Dave Cockrum. So that's cool. And here's a tribute to Wine and Cockrum. I think this is relatively recent, where I think they basically got a bunch of artists to redraw the giant size X-Men story. Yeah. Kind of a fun idea. Here's an issue of, I guess there were only 2 issues of this, X-Men and Alpha Flight, one of the many X-Men crossover miniseries that have existed over the years. There's one for the Micronauts that I should really try and get a copy of. It's not included in those fancy hardcovers for some reason I cannot possibly imagine. Here is number 1 of the Krakoa run, which I think I just picked up because to see what was going on. Here is a 3D reprint of an X-Men that I guess famously teams up Wolverine with Captain America and the Black Widow. I wasn't really reading the book at that time. It's Chris Claremont and Jim Lee, and they've basically just remastered this with 3D coloring. And it looks like I have a few issues of the original X-Men run, which I picked up as I didn't pick these up as a kid, but when I was reading it as a kid, I started reading somewhere around issue 150, 155, after the whole Dark Phoenix story and Cockrum had left, and I think Byrne and Austin were gone at that point too, and they were getting into art by like John Romita Jr. and people like that, which is kind of the run that I have here, a bunch between issues 174 and 205, introducing Madeline Pryor and all these people. Oh, Paul Smith, right. Paul Smith drew the book for a little bit. Liked him. Romita Jr. was not really my favorite on the book. I mean, he had kind of a rough act to follow, both in terms of his own family and the previous X-Men artists, but I think he did fine under those conditions, but yeah, I just don't love this era of the book, and I stopped reading it at the time, well before it hit number 200. The last issue I see here is 205 with what looks like a very Weapon X kind of cover on there. Yeah, this looks like a Barry Windsor Smith issue. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. Cool. I don't know if that's just a self-contained issue or what, but seems pretty good. All right, so that's it for the W's, and we are approaching the end here because one of the last books here is a long run. I have what looks like the first issue of a title called X-Ray Robot by the Allreds and Nate Picos. Yeah, just another wacky science fiction series from the Allreds. I should pick up the rest of that actually. It's fun. Miniseries in DC's Black Label imprint called Zatanna, Bring Down the House by Mariko Tamaki and Javier Rodriguez. Really enjoyed this book. I finally caught up on reading it uh, maybe about a month ago. And I really dug the art by Rodriguez. Lovely covers as well by the likes of Tula Lotay, of course. Yeah, very solid series, great character. And it explores a lot about what her character kind of means in the context of magic in DC Comics, so it was very interesting from that perspective. The first issue of the Zero Patrol, one of the Neil Adams company titles. He had his own company called Continuity Comics in the 80s, trying to, I don't know if he was trying to compete exactly with Marvel and DC, but, wanted to be racked with Marvel and DC Comics. They had a few different titles that I don't know if he was trying to do them all himself or if he was just doing backups on all of them to get people to buy them. But anyway, much like other attempts at the time, like the New Universe, it didn't last very long. I think part of the problem was just Neil Adams is maybe not the fastest worker as far as the needs of the mainstream comics publishing business goes. So that could probably fly these days, but back then everything was very much designed around monthly publishing. Speaking of, Scott McCloud's great early book Zot. This is the whole series, 36 issues. Plus there's a mini comic in there and some other kind of weird side spin-off stuff. Scott McCloud, of course, is best known these days as the creator of the great book Understanding Comics and its two sequels. And he had a pretty good graphic novel release a few years ago called The Sculptor. Very weighty tome in more ways than one about making art and how it's received and how we relate to other people. And Zot, in many ways, is kind of his first attempt along those lines, but it's couched in superhero comics fused with manga and a lot of devices and conventions thereof. He kind of brought into his comics in the early to mid 80s, I want to say. It's always been a very beloved book. I think for those of us who know it and love it, we're a little frustrated by how it's never really had a great collection. Kitchen Sink Press did some hardcover kind of deluxe collections, but they were very expensive, punishingly so, and I don't think it I don't know if it even got the entire series collected. Um, there's also a single volume edition that is kind of more manga style. It's, you know, kind of 5 by 7. It's not, reverse read. It's still read the American way. Um, but I remember being disappointed when I saw that book because it omits a couple issues. Um, Two of the best issues, if you ask me. A story called Getting to 99, which was not illustrated by Scott McCloud. It was done by Chuck Austin. McCloud wrote it. I think there was some kind of deadline pressure involved, or I don't know. Again, the expectation was get your comic out monthly. Um, and I assume because of a rights issue, the Austin story did not get into the single volume edition, which is also just black and white. Um, I have a trade paperback of the first 4 issues, I believe, that Eclipse Comics, the original publisher, released at the time. And that's not a bad edition, but it's not the whole book. It would be really nice to see like a complete edition that includes the Matt Fiesel backup comics. There were a lot of kind of additional material that McCloud kind of threw in, even just illustrations for selling off his own original art, which I think may have also been a bit of a problem for later collections, was finding good source materials. But anyway, if you can find it, I highly recommend you read Zod by Scott McCloud and friends. Especially the final arc. It wasn't really a book that had story arcs for the most part. Um, there were a few kind of stories that would continue over 2 or 3 issues, but usually it was kind of one and done, as was the fashion at the time. But the last, I think it's 8 issues of the book, are called the Earth Stories. And it was after McCloud took a bit of a break, I think probably to kind of get ahead on the schedule and maybe try and get some other stuff done. They came back with a storyline where the main character is Zach Paleozod is his name. He's a superhero in an alternate Earth where they figured all their shit out. It's like this utopian planet. They don't even really need superheroes. He's just going around um, stopping goofy, mostly relatively harmless supervillains from doing their thing. Um, and he meets a girl his age from our Earth named Jenny, who joins him on his adventures. And in the Earth stories, he crosses over into Jenny's world and gets stuck there, and gets stuck on our Earth, and has to cope with real crime and real hopelessness. And it's just very, you know, it's much more the kind of Scott McCloud stuff that we are maybe used to now. Um, and it has a very lovely kind of queer positive storyline, which was unusual at the time. So I highly recommend those issues if you can find them, especially. But the whole run, if you can find it, especially, is very very much worth reading. Um, and that's it. That's the end of Longbox 4. That did take longer than I expected it would. That's all right. So I'll say goodbye for now, kids, and I'll be back next time with a couple of short boxes of kind of, well, you'll see. So read more comics and have a good one. Love you.